apotheosis of the digital age. A man stands before the altar of capitalism, holding a slab of glass and metal that he promises will change everything. And he was right. It did. But look closer. Strip away the keynote glamour. Forget the soaring stock price. Look at the silhouette. While the world saw a Messiah unveiling the future, biology saw a host body failing. At the very moment he was securing his immortality in silicon, his carbon form was beginning its final rapid decay. He was the most powerful man in technology, holding the universe in his palm. Yet he was utterly powerless against the cells mutating within his own pancreas. This is the central paradox of Steve Jobs, a man obsessed with closed systems, with absolute control over every pixel and every circuit, slowly realizing that he is trapped in the one system he cannot hack, his own mortality. History and Apple's marketing department has painted him as a secular saint, the visionary, the rebel, the man who thought different. We are told he was a bodhisattva of design, who descended from the mountain to save us from the beige mediocrity of Microsoft. That is the lie. Or rather, that is the marketing. The truth is far uglier and far more compelling. Steve Jobs wasn't a creator because he loved humanity. He didn't build the Macintosh to help you write your novel, and he didn't build the iPod to help you enjoy your music. He was a man possessed by the dark Triad, Narcissism, Machiavellianism, and a touch of psychopathy. To those in his orbit, he wasn't a guru. He was a terror. He parked in handicap spots because rules were for the others. He denied paternity of his own daughter, Lisa, claiming he was sterile, while preparing to launch a computer named after her. He berated waitresses for the texture of their smoothies, and fired loyal engineers in elevators because they couldn't answer a question in the time it took to move 3 floors. He viewed the world through a binary lens. You were either a genius or a bozo. A product was either insanely great or shit. There was no middle ground. Why? Because nuance requires empathy, and empathy slows you down. So, we arrive at the question that will haunt the next hour of our time together. If he was this cruel, this abrasive, this fundamentally broken, how did he convince the world to love him? And more importantly, why did he do it? The Latin phrase, Memento Mori, translates to, remember you must die. Most people avoid this thought. They bury it under distractions. Steve Jobs weaponized it. He didn't just want to make products. He wanted to build monuments. He wasn't competing with Bill Gates or IBM. He was competing with oblivion. Every rounded corner, every closed screw, every hermetically sealed battery was an act of defiance against the chaos of organic life. He couldn't fix his family. He couldn't fix his body. So he created a digital universe where he was God, where he could control the user experience from the moment they opened the box until the moment the screen went black. He didn't change the world because he wanted to uplift us. He changed the world because he was terrified that if he stopped running, the darkness would catch up. But to understand the God we have to examine the ghost. The psychological architecture of Steve Jobs, the ruthlessness, the need for control, the insatiable hunger for validation wasn't forged in a garage in Los Altos. It was forged decades earlier, before Apple, before Atari, before he even had a name. It began with a primal wound, a reject. Steve Jobs liked to tell people he was chosen. That was the story he told the world. But deep down, in the darkest recesses of his psyche, he knew the other truth. The truth that drove him to burn bridges and build empires. He wasn't just chosen. He was abandoned. A young woman, Joanne Schiebel, unmarried and terrified. A young man, Abdul Fattah Jandali, a Syrian immigrant. And a baby boy they cannot keep. The boy is handed over to Paul and Clara Jobs, a working-class couple who could barely afford the promise they had to make to secure the adoption, a pledge that this boy, this unknown variable, would one day graduate from college. This is the moment the clock starts ticking, but it is also the moment the fissure forms. Steve Jobs would later violently reject the term abandoned. He clung to the story Paul and Clara told him like a shield. They looked him in the eye and said, "We specifically picked you out. We chose you." Chosen. It is a powerful word, a seductive word. But for a child with an IQ that would soon outstrip everyone in his zip code, chosen is just a pretty mask for unwanted. Psychologically, this created a duality that would define the rest of his life. The abandoned child feels a void, a gnawing sense of unworthiness, a fear that he is a mistake. But the chosen one feels a destiny, a messianic need to prove that he is not just worthy, but superior. This collision created a volatile chemical reaction. To survive the trauma of rejection, Steve Jobs decided that he would not accept the reality given to him. If the world didn't want him, he would build a new world. He would bend reality until it fit the shape of his ego. This was the birth of the reality distortion field. It wasn't a management technique. It was a survival mechanism. Fast forward to the garage, Los Altos. The mythology of Silicon Valley wants you to see this as a golden era of innocence. Two friends, a soldering iron, and a dream. But look closer at the dynamic. On one side, you have Steve Wozniak, the Woz, a pure soul, a benevolent engineer who saw technology as a playground. Wozniak built circuit boards because he loved the poetry of logic. He wanted to give his designs away for free. He wanted to share the magic. On the other side, you have Steve Jobs. He didn't know a capacitor from a resistor. He wasn't an engineer. He was a hunter. While Wozniak saw a hobby, Jobs saw leverage. While Wozniak saw a computer, Jobs saw a weapon to conquer the status quo. There is a disturbing beauty in their partnership. It was symbiotic, yes, but it was also parasitic. Jobs needed a host organism, someone with the raw talent he lacked, so he could extract the genius and package it for the masses. This brings us to the fundamental distinction that most biographies miss: the difference between a creator and a visionary. Wozniak was a creator. He worked within the laws of physics to build something that functioned. Jobs was a visionary. He worked within the laws of desire to build something that mattered. A creator solves a problem. A visionary creates a need. Jobs realized early on that people didn't know what they wanted until he showed it to them. He understood that technology wasn't about utility. It was about emotion. It was about power. But power requires a sacrifice. And usually, that sacrifice is someone else. Let's talk about the Atari incident. 1974. This is the litmus test for the Dark Triad. Jobs secures a contract to design a game called Breakout. He can't do it. He has no idea how to optimize the chips. So he brings in Wozniak. He tells Woz, if we do this in 4 days, we split the money 50-50. Wozniak, the loyal friend, stays awake for 4 days straight. He hallucinates from exhaustion. He performs a miracle of engineering, reducing the chip count significantly. Nolan Bushnell, the founder of Atari, pays Jobs a bonus, $5,000. Jobs walks up to Wozniak, hands him $350, and says, here's your half of the $700 we got. He pocketed the rest. He looked his best friend in the eye, the man who had just saved him, and lied without a tremor in his voice. It wasn't about the money. $5,000 was nothing to what they would make later. It was about dominance. It was a test. Can I rewrite the truth? Can I control the narrative? Will he believe me? Yes, he did. This is the Machiavellian element in full bloom. People were resources. Relationships were transactional. If you could be used, you were chosen. If you couldn't, you were abandoned. Then comes 1976, the Apple I, then the Apple II. The garage becomes an office. The hippie with the bare feet and the fruitarian diet puts on a suit. But the suit doesn't tame the savage nature. It just disguises it. As Apple grew, so did the shadow. Jobs wasn't satisfied with just selling computers. He wanted to curate an aesthetic. He obsessed over the curves of the plastic, the typography on the screen. He screamed at employees until they cried, not because he hated them, but because their imperfection was a personal insult to his constructed reality. He was trying to fill the void of his adoption with perfection. If the product was perfect, then he was perfect. If the user loved the Mac, then the user loved him. But the tragedy of the narcissist is that no amount of external validation is ever enough to silence the internal critic. By the end of the 70 seconds, Steve Jobs was a millionaire. He was the face of the future. He was the Prince of Silicon Valley. But inside the walls of Apple, the atmosphere was shifting. The benevolent dictator was becoming a tyrant. He began to isolate teams. He'd pit the Macintosh team against the Lisa team, treating his own company like a gladiator arena. He believed that friction produced diamonds. He didn't care about the casualties. He didn't care about the burnout. He was the chosen one, and he was beginning to believe his own press. He thought he was untouchable. He thought the reality distortion field could bend the board of directors, the market, and the laws of economics. He was wrong. The monster he had fed, the arrogance, the cruelty, the uncompromising vision, was about to turn on its master. The higher he built his tower, the more unstable the foundation became. He thought he was building a legacy. In reality, he was setting the stage for his own exile. The boy who was abandoned once was about to be abandoned again. 1981. The garage is a memory. Apple is a corporation. And Steve Jobs is about to discover his superpower. It was an Apple software engineer, Bud Tribble, who gave it a name, borrowing a term from Star Trek. He called it the reality distortion field. To the outside world, this sounded like a quirky metaphor for Steve's charisma, a charming anecdote about a persuasive leader. But to those inside the bunker, to the engineers sleeping under their desks, and the designers weeping in the bathrooms, it was not a metaphor. It was a weapon. The reality distortion field was a localized phenomenon where the laws of physics, the constraints of time, and the limits of logic were suspended by the sheer force of Steve's will. If Steve said a task that required 6 months could be done in 2 weeks, you didn't argue. You didn't present a spreadsheet. You looked into his unblinking, black eyes, eyes that seemed to stare right through your skull, and you suddenly believed him. You believed him because he didn't just lie. He rearranged the truth. He gaslighted you into greatness. This is the dark sorcery of the visionary. He understood a fundamental flaw in the human operating system. We are terrified of the impossible. Steve was not. He treated impossible as a failure of imagination. He would walk up to an engineer working on the Macintosh boot sequence. The engineer was proud. He had shaved the time down to 2 minutes. Steve looked at it with disgust. "It's too slow," he said. "If this computer could save a life, would you find a way to shave 10 seconds off the boot time?" The engineer tried to explain the technical limitations. Steve cut him off. He started doing the math on a whiteboard. If 5 million people use the Mac, and it takes 10 seconds extra to turn on every day, that's 50 million seconds. That's dozens of lifetimes wasted by you. He reframed a coding problem as a moral failing. He put the weight of human life on a circuit board. And the terrifying part, the engineer went back to his desk. He didn't sleep. He broke the code. He shaved off the 10 seconds. Steve was right, but the victory wasn't for the user. It was for Steve's ego. He had bent reality to his will, and the engineers were just the tools he used to do it. But this field came with a heavy price. It required a total suspension of empathy. To maintain the illusion of perfection, Steve had to eradicate anything messy, anything uncontrollable, anything human. And nothing is messier than family. This brings us to the darkest chapter of his psychological profile. The shadow, the denial of Lisa. In 1978, his girlfriend, Chrisanne Brennan, gave birth to a daughter, Lisa. Steve, the man who had been abandoned by his own biological parents, did the unthinkable. He abandoned his own child. The irony is Shakespearean. Here was a man preparing to launch a computer called the Apple Lisa, a machine he claimed would redefine the future, while simultaneously signing court documents claiming he was sterile and infertile to avoid paying child support. He was worth millions. Chrisanne and Lisa were on welfare. Why? It wasn't about the money. It was about control. Lisa was an accident. She was a glitch in his meticulously designed life. She was proof that he was biological, fallible, and mortal. To acknowledge her was to acknowledge a loss of control. So, he applied the reality distortion field to his own conscience. He simply decided she didn't exist. He looked at the paternity test, 4% probability, and declared it a statistical error. This is the dark triad in its purest form. The narcissist refuses to accept a reality that doesn't flatter him. The psychopath feels no guilt for the pain he inflicts. He would walk past his daughter's picture and feel nothing, yet weep openly if the shade of beige on a computer case was slightly off. He reserved his emotional capacity for plastic and silicon, leaving none for flesh and blood. 1984. The crescendo. The Macintosh launch. This was his masterpiece. The 1984 commercial aired during the Super Bowl, directed by Ridley Scott. A woman with a sledgehammer shattering the screen of Big Brother. The symbolism was intoxicating. Steve cast IBM as the conformist, the drone, the Big Brother, and he cast Apple and himself as the liberator, the rebel. When he unveiled the Macintosh at the Flint Center, the crowd didn't just clap. They screamed. It was evangelical. He stood there in his bow tie, bathed in the spotlight, listening to the computer speak. "Hello, I am Macintosh." In that moment, the orphan from San Francisco was gone. He was a god. He had created life. He had birthed a machine that smiled at you. But hubris is a blinding light. Success acted like gasoline on the fire of his arrogance. He began to believe his own marketing. He believed the reality distortion field could apply to corporate governance. He believed he was bigger than the board of directors, bigger than the market, bigger than the company itself. He split Apple in two. He raised the pirate flag over the Macintosh building. He openly mocked the Apple II team, the team that was actually making the money, keeping the company alive. He called them dull and boring. He treated his own colleagues as the enemy. He was creating a civil war inside his own empire. He brought in John Scully from Pepsi, famously asking him, "Do you want to sell sugared water for the rest of your life? Or do you want to come with me and change the world?" It was the ultimate seduce. But Steve didn't want a partner. He wanted a father figure he could eventually destroy. He wanted someone to witness his greatness. But the reality distortion field has a limit. It works on people. It works on design. But it does not work on economics. And it does not work on gravity. The Macintosh was beautiful. It was revolutionary. But it was slow. It was underpowered. And it wasn't selling. The insanely great product was failing in the marketplace. The whispers in the boardroom began. The mood shifted from awe to concern. The pirates were starting to look like mutineers. Steve didn't see it coming. He was too busy looking in the mirror. He thought the rules didn't apply to him. He thought he was the sun around which Apple orbited. He was about to learn a brutal lesson in astrophysics. When a star burns this bright, this hot, and this fast, it creates a black hole, and it was about to swallow him whole. The air is thin. The silence is deafening. We are witnessing a scene ripped straight from a Greek tragedy. This isn't just a corporate dispute. It is a ritual sacrifice. It is patricide in reverse. The Father is not killing the Son. The creation is killing the Creator. Steve Jobs looks around the table. He sees the faces of men he hired. Men he charmed. Men he bullied. And at the head of the table sits John Scully, the man Steve courted, the man he treated as a surrogate father, the man to whom he entrusted his kingdom. Scully calls for the vote. It is a binary choice, us or him, stability or chaos, the suit or the rebel. One by one, the hands go up, and they are not raised for Steve. The gavel comes down. It's over. Steve is stripped of his operational duties. He is given an office in a remote building on the Apple campus, a building nicknamed Siberia. No phone calls, no meetings, no power. He is a ghost, haunting his own house. The psychological impact of this moment cannot be overstated. For a man whose entire identity was fused with his company, who saw Apple not as an employer, but as an extension of his own body, this was an amputation. He later said he felt like he had been punched in the stomach. But it was worse than that. It was the confirmation of his deepest, most primal fear, rejection. The abandoned child had built a castle to ensure he would never be thrown out again, and the world just threw him out. He leaves Apple. He wanders the empty halls of his mansion in Woodside. No furniture, just a mattress, a stereo, and the ghost of his hubris. He is 30 years old. He is fabulously wealthy, and he is utterly alone. But the ego does not die easily. Enter the wilderness years. Most biographies gloss over this period as a mere transition. They are wrong. This is the crucible. This is where the metal is melted down. His first instinct is not humility. It is revenge. He founds next. The name itself is a statement. What is next? I am next. If Apple was about changing the world, Nexty was about proving Apple wrong. It was a company built on spite. And because he hadn't learned his lesson yet, he doubled down on his worst impulses. The reality distortion field went into overdrive. He demanded the next computer be a perfect cube, a perfect black cube of magnesium. The engineers told him that making a perfect 90-degree angle with magnesium was impossible. The molds would break. He didn't care. He spent hundreds of thousands of dollars just to get the paint right. He scrutinized the finish of the screws on the inside of the machine screws that no human eye would ever see. He wasn't building a computer for customers. He was building a shrine to himself. And the result? A commercial disaster. The machine was beautiful. It was technologically advanced. And it cost $6, $500. No one bought it. University labs couldn't afford it. The market shrugged. For the first time in his life, the reality distortion field failed completely. He couldn't charm the bank account. He was bleeding money. His reputation was in tatters. The press, who once worshipped him, now wrote his obituary. The rise and fall of Steve Jobs. He was staring into the abyss of irrelevance. But in the darkness of the wilderness, something unexpected happened. A lifeline appeared, not from hardware, not from silicon, but from storytelling. He had bought a small computer graphics division from George Lucas for $5 million. He called it Pixar. For years, Pixar was a money pit. Steve poured millions of his own fortune into it, keeping it on life support. He tried to sell it hardware. He tried to sell it software. He tried to sell the company itself. Nobody wanted it. But there was a small team of artists there. John Lasseter, Ed Catmull, dreamers. And here, forced by the sheer weight of failure, Steve Jobs did something he had never done before. He let go. He realized he couldn't direct the movie. He didn't know how to animate. He didn't understand the nuances of character arc. He was the financier, the protector, but he was not the creator. For a control freak, this is a kind of death, but it was also a liberation. When Toy Story was in production, Steve watched from the sidelines. He saw the struggle. He saw the passion. And he saw something that mirrored his own life. A story about a toy Woody terrified of being replaced, terrified of being abandoned, learning that love is not a zero-sum game. The premiere of Toy Story in 1995 was the turning point. Not just for his bank account. The IPO made him a billionaire, but for his soul. He stood in the back of the theater. He watched the audience laugh. He watched them cry. And he realized that he hadn't made a single pixel of that movie. He hadn't written a single line of dialogue. And yet, it was a triumph. He learned the most important lesson of the wilderness. You do not have to be the smartest person in the room to be the leader. This brings us to the value, the thesis of this act. Why was this failure necessary? The ancient Greeks believed that hubris must always be followed by nemesis, retribution. But if you survive the retribution, you achieve phronesis, practical wisdom. Success is a terrible teacher. It seduces you into thinking you can't lose. It validates your worst habits. When the Macintosh succeeded, it told Steve that his cruelty was justified. It told him that his arrogance was actually genius. Failure stripped that away. The wilderness humbled him. It didn't make him nice. Steve Jobs would never be a nice man, but it made him mature. It taught him the value of patience. It taught him that a beautiful product means nothing if it doesn't solve a real problem. It taught him that the reality distortion field works best when it invites people in, rather than forcing them to kneel. At NXT, he failed because he tried to force the world to be what he wanted. At Pixar, he succeeded because he allowed talent to flourish. He was no longer just the brash, punk rock rebel of the 70 seconds. The gray hairs were appearing in his beard. The jeans were the same. The turtleneck was the same, but the eyes were different. They were no longer just hungry. They were focused. He had been the prince. He had been the exile. Now he was ready to become the king. But fate has a sense of humor, because just as Steve was finding his footing, the kingdom he left behind was burning to the ground. Apple was dying. It was 90 days away from bankruptcy. The bozo explosion he had predicted had happened. The company was rudderless, desperate, and bleeding cash. They needed a savior. They needed a visionary. And on a cold day in 1996, the phone rang in Nexty's headquarters. The prodigal son was not going to beg for forgiveness. He was going to be invited back, and he was bringing the wolf with him. He walks back onto the campus he built, not as a prodigal son seeking forgiveness, but as a surgeon entering an emergency room. Apple is bleeding to death. Losses of $1 billion a year. A product line so confused that even the employees couldn't explain it. The Steve Jobs who returned was different. The wilderness had stripped away the fat, leaving only muscle and scar tissue. He didn't come back for revenge. Revenge is petty. Revenge is for people with time. He came back for redemption. He walks into a boardroom filled with product roadmaps, dozens of printers, dozens of computers. He looks at them with disdain. Then he draws a simple grid on a whiteboard. 2 lines, 4 quadrants. Consumer, pro, desktop, portable. That was it. He turned to the room and said, "Stop everything else." In that moment, he killed 70% of Apple's products. Thousands of people lost their jobs. Engineers wept, but Steve didn't blink. He wasn't running a charity. He was building an ark. He understood something no one else did. Focus is not about saying yes. Focus is about saying no. It is about the terrifying discipline of killing good ideas to make room for the insanely great ones. This era wasn't just about business strategy. It was about philosophy. The Think Different campaign. Einstein, Gandhi, Ali. It wasn't marketing. It was a mirror. When Richard Dreyfuss read those words, "Here's to the crazy ones," he wasn't talking about the customers. He was talking about the man in the black turtleneck. Steve was projecting his own chosen one complex onto the entire world. He was telling us, if you buy this machine, you are not just a user. You are a rebel, like me. And we believed him. The iMac, the Apple Store, the iPod. Suddenly, technology wasn't beige and boring. It was white, pure, and musical. The white earbuds became a status symbol. He had done it. He had turned silicon into desire. He was the king of the world. The stock price was soaring. The reality distortion field was at its absolute peak. He could point at a piece of glass and make the world want to touch it. But the universe has a cruel sense of irony. October 2003. The height of his power. And the moment the clock starts ticking louder than ever before. A routine scan. A shadow on the pancreas. Neuroendocrine tumor. A rare form of pancreatic cancer. But, and this is the crucial but, it was treatable. Surgical removal offered a high probability of a cure. Any rational man would have been on the operating table within hours. But Steve Jobs was not a rational man. He was a man who had spent 30 years bending reality to his will. He had defied markets. He had defied logic. He had defied gravity. He looked at the doctor and said, no. He didn't want his body violated. He didn't want to be cut open. Instead, he turned to magical thinking. He tried to treat a lethal tumor with a diet of carrot juice and acupuncture. He tried to debug his cancer like it was a line of faulty code. He believed that if he just focused hard enough, if he just willed it away, the cancer would listen. This is the ultimate tragedy of the reality distortion field. It works on people. It works on supply chains. It does not work on biology. For 9 months, while the world praised his genius, the tumor grew. It metastasized. It spread its dark roots into his liver. By the time he admitted he was wrong, by the time he asked for the surgery, the window had closed. The god of technology had committed the oldest sin in the book, hubris. He thought he was exempt from the laws of nature. January 9, 2007. The Moscone Center. We are back where we started. He stands on stage. He is thinner now. The cancer has taken a piece of him, but the fire in his eyes is brighter than ever. He knows his time is short. He knows this is his final act. He holds up the iPhone, an iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. The crowd cheers, but they don't see what is really happening. This isn't just a product launch. This is a transference of soul. Steve Jobs knew his body was failing. It was messy. It was painful. It was betraying him. So he poured everything he was, his obsession with perfection, his need for control, his desire for beauty, into a vessel that would never get cancer, a vessel that would never age. The iPhone. Look at it. It is a sealed garden. You cannot change the battery. You cannot see the screws. You cannot tinker with the code. It is the ultimate expression of the control freak. It is a beautiful, cold, perfect prison, and we all lined up to live inside it. As he swiped across the screen, he wasn't just unlocking a phone. He was unlocking the future of humanity. He was changing how we talk, how we love, how we exist. He was a dying wizard performing his greatest trick. He made the interface disappear, so that there was nothing left but the experience. The years that followed were a slow, painful fade. The liver transplant, the medical leaves, the images of him looking like a wraith, walking with infinite slowness to his car. But even as his body disintegrated, his mind remained sharp, cruel, and brilliant. He designed the iPad from his sickbed. He planned the Apple Park spaceship campus, a perfect circle, a loop with no beginning and no end, while he was preparing for his own end. He worked until the very last day. Why? Because of the abandoned child. He was terrified that if he stopped, he would cease to exist. He needed to make sure that his dent in the universe was so deep, so permanent, that time could never wash it away. He didn't believe in the afterlife. He believed in the legacy. October 5, 2011. The screen goes black. The man dies. But look around you. Look at the device in your hand right now. Look at the screen you are watching this on. He is still here. He is in the font. He is in the swipe. He is in the rounded corners of your digital existence. He won the race. He beat the clock. He sacrificed his life, his family, and his peace to become a ghost in the machine. But as we stand here, surrounded by the beautiful, silent glass rectangles he left behind, we have to ask the final question. Was it worth it? So, how do we judge a man like Steve Jobs? Do we weigh the sins of the Father against the miracles of the Creator? Do we balance the tears of his employees against the joy of billions of users? It is a math problem that has no answer. In the end, the story of Steve Jobs is not a story about technology. It is a tragedy about intimacy. The abandoned child spent 56 years trying to prove that he was worthy of existence. He built the biggest company in history to answer a question that was asked in 1955. Why didn't they want me? He tried to fill that primal void with product. He tried to plug the hole in his soul with perfect, seamless glass. He believed that if he could just control the user experience, he could control his own pain. But glass is cold. It doesn't love you back. Did he find peace? Probably not. Peace is for those who accept the world as it is. Steve Jobs was at war with the world until his final breath. He was a man running on a treadmill of his own making, terrified that if he stopped, the ordinary would catch him. And this leaves us, the audience, the users, the disciples, with a dangerous lesson. We look at his life, and we see the glory. We see the turtleneck, the applause, the billions. We romanticize the dark triad. We tell ourselves that to be a genius, we must be a jerk. We tell ourselves that greatness requires cruelty. But that is a trap. Steve Jobs didn't succeed because he was broken. He succeeded in spite of it. His products were beautiful, but the wreckage he left behind in the human hearts around him was ugly. He changed the world, yes, but he missed out on his own life. He spent so much time designing the future that he forgot to inhabit the present. So, if you are watching this, and you feel that burning hunger, that desire to put a dent in the universe, ask yourself, what are you willing to burn to keep that fire alive? Are you willing to sacrifice your relationships, your peace, your health? Steve Jobs made that trade. He gave us the iPhone, and in exchange, he gave the altar of history his life. He was the ultimate Icarus. He flew closer to the sun than anyone else in Silicon Valley. He touched the face of God. He brought back the fire, but he burned his wings to ash. The screen you are looking at right now is his monument. It is also his tombstone. It is a black mirror. When it is on, it shows you the world. But when it is off, it only shows you your own reflection. Look at it. Deep in that black glass, the ghost of the abandoned child is still staring back at you. He once ended a speech with a quote from the Whole Earth catalog. It was a farewell message. Stay hungry. Stay foolish. For years, we thought it was an invitation to be curious. Now, we know the truth. It was a warning. To stay hungry is to never be satisfied. To stay foolish is to believe you can cheat death. Stay hungry. Stay foolish.